today, Brian and I are here with Dr. Randy Wright. He is a neurologist based down in Houston, and he's going to talk to us today about some of the effects that the pandemic is having on our brain health. I mean, we know it's having lots of effects, but we're going to talk about specifically how it's affecting our brain. So thank you so much for joining us today, Doctor.
Thank you for having me. I really do appreciate it.
So before we kind of dive into today's topic, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the things you're working on right now?
Well, so I am in Houston, and I'm a neurologist, and so I work with the brain, and I've always found the brain to be a fascinating organ. Ever since high school, was enthralled by how the brain works, and over time decided to go into engineering as an undergraduate instead of medicine, and enjoyed that. But I always had that longing to return back to how did all this start? How does the brain work? And so I ended up going to medical school after engineering school and became a neurologist. And so now I work with the brain from a variety of different conditions. And I just find it totally fascinating. And I was really even curious about you guys' podcast here, about the Insomniac, because I do a lot of insomnia. And so I was intrigued. I'm like, I have to ask them, like, where did the name come from? I'm totally interested.
While you are correct, and that's not actually where the name came from.
Yeah, yeah. It's a long-ish story, but I'm gonna keep it really short. Way back when, I owned a computer company. Like this is before like Alienware. Like we used to manufacture, gaming machines, and I started with my brother-in-law, and we didn't know anything. We were in our 20s. We didn't know anything about like forming a company. So we just flipped when we found out someone had to be a president and someone had to be the vice president, and we flipped a coin, and whoever won got to be president, and whoever didn't win got to name the company. I won, so I was president of the company, and he's like, "I'm going to name it Insomniac." I'm like, "What the hell does that even mean?" Like, I don't even like cats. But when we started Insomniac, the media company, he unfortunately committed suicide way back when. Yeah, and we just sort of did it in homage. The company was just named in homage to sort of that funny little weird story that was part of our lives. So
Wow.
So yeah.
Wow, because it's just, I was like, I've never seen that twist on Insomniac, and I was like,
yeah.
Yes, Brian doesn't sleep. No, we don't sleep at all. So if anybody ever needs us, there's only about 2 hours a day that we're both not available. So
that's sort of true. Yeah.
But back to you, Dr. Randy. So what's going on here? I'm sure, how did things change for you at the onset of this pandemic, and sort of what you were studying, and how did those things jive? I want to get into the effects, but how did this start for you at the very beginning?
Yeah, it was. I think we all remember that fateful day when we saw that the cases were rising, and we're like, okay, this isn't something that this over there. This may be coming here. And then we saw the airline traffic get shut down to international travel. Then we saw Tom Hanks come down with the condition. And then the NBA closed games all of a sudden. We're like, whoa, this is serious. Like that was at one point, we're like, okay, I'm going to hear about this in clinic the next
The
day.
NBA did it for you, right?
Yeah, that's what I was like, my God, that's it. My boys were upset,
Right.
And so then the next day we started kind of recognizing that, okay, how are we going to treat people? How will we engage with the patients? And then we started hearing rumor of a shutdown.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's the shutdown? What does that mean? How are we going to see patients? And we were doing telemedicine before that, just a little bit. And telemedicine is when we, just like what we're doing now, we're basically Skyping, but you do it in a controlled, secure kind of portal that allows you to talk to your patients and still do the exam and the history. And so, like, maybe we should start to really ramp this up a little bit, in case this does happen, because how we're going to maintain our clinics. And interestingly enough, I've been a big telemedicine proponent for many years. We've been doing it in our practice for quite some time, but many doctors didn't think that that was a way to do it. How can you examine a patient? How can you get a patient-doctor relationship via video screen. And there were so many questions that were going on that some people embraced it, many didn't. They weren't against it, but it was just maybe, maybe not. But then once the pandemic hit, it was all hands on deck. How are we going to keep our clinics open? And we overnight really flipped to doing all televisits, and patients loved it, and it was one that really, I think, really saved many medical professions that weren't procedure based, right? You couldn't do procedures during the lockdown, right. But during the time when you couldn't see a doctor, this was a great way to do it. And so the pandemic, from the very onset, flipped us into using technology as a way to help continue to treat patients. And for me, that was just an eye-opening experience, and it's one that really reinforced my belief that technology is the next greatest thing to help with medicine. Did you guys ever encounter any kind of televisits at all?
I did do one, actually, when I was paranoid that I had the COVID. So,
oh boy.
my doctor, just like this, I had to click a special link, and he's a little bit vain. He was at the gym downstairs in his house. So he was, up with the towel. We've known him for many, many years. So he's, and he's, got the towel around his neck, drinking his protein shake. But it was, it was cool. It was different.
It's definitely different. And I tell you, since we've been doing this, and we've seen a lot of interesting locations where people have done their televisits. We're always in an office, or an environment like that. But I've seen people, like I said, at the gym. I've seen people who are in the courthouse. I'm like, are you in trial right now?
Like, what did you do?
I was like, aren't phones illegal? But anyway, I won't tell their tale, but there's been some interesting locations, and it actually gives us a clue into what's really going on in the patient's lives. I do a lot of sleep medicine, for example, and part of what was a challenge was really trying to understand what's in the patient's world that's preventing them from sleeping. Right. And now we're literally in their bedroom. I'm like, right. Okay, so that lamp's too big, or that you have a dog in your room. Right. Actually has allowed us to really feel more connected. And that's, I think, one of the interesting things about technology, that technology is good, but it can also be bad. But then when you really have an open mind to it, you can really find ways to really make it work for your situation. And I would say, back to your original question, that has been a big theme during this whole pandemic, is making things work for your situation. And technology is one of them.
So what about all of us? What are you seeing? We're affected. There's no, in one way or another, we're affected. And, what are you seeing as some of the core ways that people are being affected, humans are being affected by this pandemic?
Yeah. So from my vantage point, being neurology, and I see all things through the brain, I think it's a great organ, that we do see, I see it really in almost two sections. I see there is the technical or the neurologic manifestations of COVID-19. Then there are the psychological manifestations that can occur, not because you have COVID, but we're in this group, this world experience that we're all going through at the same time, and that can lead to other problems as well. So we can take it one by one. So for example, on the technical side of COVID, we would typically think of it as a respiratory illness, but we are seeing that there are some neurological manifestations that people can get at the time of infection. So people sometimes present with strokes. We've seen that when it affects the brain itself. People can sometimes present with peripheral problems like the smell. That ends up being because it affects the olfactory bulbs. And that is one of the main presenting symptoms that can clue you into that this might not be just the regular flu, Right. And so that's neurological manifestations. We also see ones that can occur down the line. Once you've recovered or are in that recovery phase, we've seen headaches, we've seen the myalgias, or the body pain and the body aching. So those are the things that I see on a technical or medical format that we see. And now that we're getting a lot of people on the back end, they've gone through COVID, they've had it, and now they're recovering. Now we're seeing these post-COVID type of manifestations. So, and that's what I'm seeing a lot in my clinic now. Luckily, the acute neurological conditions, they're not that common, luckily. But the other ones we do see quite a bit.
Okay.
So,
Now,
I have,
go ahead, Brian.
I have a question about the insomnia, right? So, do you think part here's my question. Right? So, do you think part of it? I mean, obviously, people are stressed, right? The world's been a really stressful place, but do you think also people like with binge watching television and things like that are causing their own insomnia? Because I find myself staying up late. I normally even stay up late, so.
You have just put my pedestal. I'm going to step on it, and we're going to get on this. No, so insomnia is actually, I would have to say, since COVID started, has been probably one of the largest causes that we've seen people coming to the neurologist for. At least for me, there's been problems, and you've mentioned one of the issues that, as you alluded to, probably preceded the coronavirus infection pandemic, but it was definitely exacerbated by the coronavirus pandemic. So insomnia, when we can't sleep. And so there are many things that can make someone not be able to sleep. Now, in general, people seem to think that insomnia has just one cause. And people are trying to find what's the cure for insomnia. Is it a pill? People lean towards different kind of medications. But in reality, we all get there different ways. Stress is one. So when, like I was stressed out last night waiting for this interview, and that can kind of keep me up. I'm thinking about it, I'm going through what I'm going to say, and all those things go through your mind. So that can cause what we call a psychogenic insomnia, because I'm just thinking through something. Did you guys ever see the movie Sex and the City?
Yeah.
The actual movie. So I think there was a scene in that particular, in the movie part of it, when the lady went to bed, and then this little list popped up over her head, and she started running the list of like, pick up the children, get some milk, get this, and that list is like, that's a beautiful manifestation of what we do when we're stressed out. We have things in our mind, and we just run that list, and that can keep us awake. So you add now a pandemic to us. When, will I get COVID? Will my family get COVID? All these things are going through our minds. We're like, is my job going to get lost? So that was just a heavy burden on many Americans and people across the world that led towards insomnia. And I almost see it in phases, right? So it was the realization that, wait a minute, this is really happening. This is not there. This is here, right? And then we hit the part of, okay, now I don't have a job to go to, or my job has changed to me working at home. Now I have this time. My kids are home. This is great. That's in quotations, right?
Yes.
And literally, we went from, in my household, I have two boys, and they're 10 and 13, and they went from, hey, it's spring break, it's a week, to like, these guys aren't going back. And I'm like, okay, now how am I going to deal with that? My wife, we have to deal with that. So that was another burden that we had to figure out. So now we're all home. And so what else do we do in the evenings? But we, kind of watch TV. And so we flipped on Netflix, and I think we finished Netflix at one point.
We finished all of it.
But your point is that you mentioned is that, yes, binge watching can be a problem. And we've done several talks about binge watching, and it can be a problem for several reasons. One, that people tend to do it at nighttime. And pre-COVID, now COVID is the daytime now, so it may have gotten better, But pre-COVID, people would work during the day, and they'd come home and they would want to relax, which sounds perfectly innocent, right? But when we relax, you may not eat the best foods. You may start to do that late at night. If you become addicted to that, and that can happen because watching TV is a highly salient stimuli that the brain loves to have. And so you want to do it over again and again. And even the way that many movies are written, it's almost like, you ever been to Vegas? You don't have to raise your hand if you have not, but you, right when you get seven and a half of a seven, oh, I could have done it. Let me try it again. Your brain sees that as, let's do it over again. And so the same thing with the movies, that they tend to end right at the climax, are almost there, and stay tuned for the next episode. And you're like, I have to watch it. And then you hit play, and here we go. I think we're all guilty of that,
Yeah.
but they're very bingeable. Yeah, that's what makes a movie bingeable.
Yeah. Funny, there's so many shows that I watched where I was like, this isn't even good. I just want to see what happens.
Right.
Like, what's going to happen here? Like, where are the writers going? Or, do you know what I mean? Like, I was like, this is horrible acting, but I'm going to watch this and see what happens.
You do. And that's why they do that,
Mm-hmm.
So, and I remember I was watching, we just finished an episode of a series. And I told my mom, and I love my parents truly, but they're still new to this technology thing, and they were getting into it. And I told her about a particular particular series, and it took me like, maybe about 4 weeks to finish it. And so I told her about it, and then like the next day, I asked her, "Hey, Mom, did you get a chance to start, this particular series?" She's like, "Oh yeah, we finished it last night." I'm like. I was like, no, that was a whole season that you had to watch. So they binge watched the whole season in one night. And I'm like,
haven't you learned anything from me, Mom?
Exactly.
And she's like calling you. She's like, can we teledoc? Because I have insomnia.
Exactly. So that happens, right? And so the binge watching late at nighttime can also contribute to insomnia, right? Because you're watching television in the evenings or late at night, you're not getting enough sleep. And the mere fact that you're looking at an LCD display, which tends to emit a certain amount of light that tends to wake you up. Now my parents were fine. They did it one time, I think, right? And
they told you.
I know, right? They kind of shut down after that. They didn't tell me anything else to do it.
And why won't you answer my text, Mom?
Exactly. But if it becomes a habit, which it easily can, then it becomes a problem. And we have seen that. And so my history now has changed to, what time do you watch TV, sir? At nighttime, because I'm trying to pull out, are they watching, TV at nighttime, which is a big problem.
Can I ask you a question? So I've read all of those studies. I know what you're talking about, and the television and it's a stimuli and you're staring at the screen. But are there people who don't fit that? So on the reverse, I couldn't sleep without the television, right? So how does that, is my brain different? Like, how does that work? Is that light not stimulating me the same way that it is somebody else?
Yeah. So I do question, is it the light or is it the sound that you're really attracted to when you go to bed?
I keep it on mute.
You keep it on mute, and it's just the view.
The movement.
Right. So it's the distraction, because you've seen there are lots of apps that have these calm type of videos with that, calm imaging. That's why we have a lot of these screens that are very calm places, right? So some people are visual. Like, I'm a visual person, right? So that the visual parts are fine. And what we do is the particular LCD light, that blue light, that can be bad. So we have filters that can change that. So if you ever do have problems sleeping and it becomes a problem, then changing the filter of the device that you use to still get those visual inputs, but you don't have that light that's waking you up.
Right.
The reason why is that our brain is designed for what we call a diurnal, which is a two-phase kind of activity. And light is the trigger to wake us up. But it's a specific kind of light. It's the light that we get in the morning time, right? That's going to wake us up. Whereas the evening light starts to help us to improve melatonin production, which tells us to go to bed. Right. So now some folks are sensitive to it. Some people are not. But you can work with it. And it's a matter of me trying to assess, where are you, right? I'm a night lark. I tend to be up late at night working. And I can sleep like that. So I'm not that affected by that particular light, but some people are. And when they are, then you can just do a filter on it.
Yeah, it was really rough when I first started living with my husband, who can't have any light at all. Everything's going to be pitch black. So that was a special arrangement there. Yes. I needed bright light, and then there was total darkness, and there was no in between.
No, I understand. My wife wants everything completely dark and quiet.
Yes.
And because I tend to work late, I do different now. I mean, I've learned to adapt, but at the beginning, I had to come to the bedroom and do commando crawls to get to the bed before not to wake anything up.
Yeah. Well, let's shift back to some of the effects that this pandemic is having on the brain. So one of the other things we've been talking about is that kind of distance, right? And not socializing as much. So I mean, I know we talk about this often in terms of the children and going back to school, but that is going to have an effect on anybody, not just elderly or children. I mean, how is that lack of socialization changing our brains a little bit?
Yeah, it's interesting, and we're learning as we go with this, as we've done for even the treatment of COVID. Um, how does our society interact when we aren't together?
Mhm.
So you look at studies and arguments for and against, do children do better in school versus on online learning? Argument for, of course, was for online was that it helps keep them safe from the virus. Arguments against sometimes core the fact that we're seeing a rise in domestic violence, right? That people are in the homes for a long time. And I love my wife, but sometimes occurs, right? And so you start to see those kind of interactions going on. Or abusive parents can sometimes be, with the stress, it gets heightened, right? We've seen psychiatric conditions heightened in these lockdowns because people are in their homes, they're disconnected from the world, and so there are lots of problems that we're seeing that have ensued because of these lockdowns and because we're socially isolated. So it ends up being a two-edged sword. Now we have two boys, and so they've engaged in it. At first, they were going a hybrid model where they would do a week in school physically and then a week home. And they had the mask and the bears, and they seemed to like that. And I was asking, like, so which one do you like better? And of course, the younger one, like, I like being home because you didn't have to brush your hair as much and you can wake up later, Um, but then the older one liked being in school because he missed his friends more.
Mhm.
And I have always questioned, was this generation suited better for this kind of condition? Because I've had sleepovers at my house. I mean, do you guys have kids?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you've had sleepovers, right? And the younger ones, the 10-year-old, have had sleepovers where we had 4 or 5 kids come over and they were all in different rooms on their iPad. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, we could have done this at home, you know? But
Right.
they were used to interacting online socially. And so it's interesting that, you know, they didn't really notice at the beginning where they were in school or not, at least the younger one, because they were still every day playing with their friends. So it's a mixed bag as far as how people react to it socially based upon thing on age. Now, my generation and older, I believe that online stuff drives you crazy because you can't have that physical contact. Um, so I think it's a mixed bag as far as how it goes, but I think we'll see as time progresses how people are going to do. But we see both sides. We see the social interaction, people really missing it and having problems because they can't get it.
Right.
And at the end, if people are together too much, then we get other problems. So it's complicated.
Yeah.
I have twin 7-year-olds that actually are in the same room texting each other. I hate you. I hate you. I'm like, like when they're fighting, they're texting each other from like literally separate couches across the living room from each other. I'm like, really? But better that than actual fighting. So,
It is.
uh,
But I do think there's also going to be, in regards to learning, though, there's going to also be, I think, an age distribution. As we look at when we're young, when the brain is learning when we're younger, we're learning how to socialize. And
Mhm.
and I've always, I feel like I'm conflicted in what I talk about because I'm very much pro technology. And I love the telemedicine space. I love using tech to help treat patients.
mhm.
But at the same time, there's also some cautionary tales that I've been saying, like, as the video gaming industry improves its virtual reality, and as you can put on a glass and you can start to see the world, I wonder, will there ever be a day that comes when the virtual world is more interesting than the real world.
Right.
And you want to spend more time in the virtual world than you do in the real world. Then what happens to us? You know?
Because I don't think, I think the biggest thing that I came away with, like, how much I miss human contact. Do you know what I mean? Like in part, like I'm a hugger by nature. Like I'll hug, random people if they're having a bad day. And now that that's like gone, like you can't just be like, oh man, you're having a bad day. We want to hug, and
Right.
and people feel better. But I think that's the biggest thing. Like that piece has sort of, with all this has been removed. And I think how does that actually play an effect on our brains and our, what's going on?
Yeah. So by nature, we're social beings, and we've wrestled with this question before. This is not the world's first traumatic event to occur in big cities. And you guys are in New York, and so and we hear. I'm not sure if it's true or not, that lots of folks have kind of left the city just to go to the countryside or to smaller towns just for, I just want to get away. And you wonder, will New York ever come back? History suggests it will, because humans like to be together, and we need that social interaction. And even part of, as a brain wellness director, and I look at the brain as a whole part of our body, that part of being healthy is those social connections, and we need that. And so right now, I do think we're feeling the effects of it, and we maybe say we're going to spread apart, but I think ultimately we're going to have that human connection again, and then we'll come back to it. Otherwise, the brain does change, and it was designed to be social. It was designed for, like when a baby is first born, it's looking for a face, it's looking for that touch, for it to connect with the mother, right? And that's a big deal, and we're hardwired like that. So I want to give someone a hug because I'm hardwired for that for the most part. And so we'll come back to it. Right now, it's tough. It really is tough.
No, what about fear? I mean, you were talking about that worrying at night, and some of that as it plays into insomnia. But I mean, fear. A lot of people are afraid for whatever reason, whether it be because of they're afraid of catching something, or they're afraid of not having money or losing their job. I mean, there's a lot of fear all over the place. I mean, what does that do to someone's brain? What does that intense fear do?
Yeah. So that's gets into almost the second part of what we've been seeing through this pandemic. On the neurology side, it was technically treating patients who had the actual infection. But now on the fear side, the fear is not those who are infected. I mean, I'm sure, people who are infected are somewhat scared too, but a lot of the fear comes from, will I get infected? And that's been a large part of what we're seeing in the clinic, is that people have this fear. And where's this fear driving from? And it's multifactorial. People have been written about that in this particular age, at this particular day, that we have a 24-hour news cycle that is promoting what's going on. So we can't escape it. And I remember at the beginning of the pandemic that we were glued to the television for hours and hours and hours. And I was kind of bipolar. We're all gonna die. We'll be fine. We're gonna, I was going back and forth, and and I'm like, Randall, get a grip, Randy, and it was tough. And we had to kind of back away a little bit, because we need information. We need to get information out there. But when it is constantly being given to you, or it's given, and we constantly receive it, then it does tend to drive that level of anxiety in us.
Right.
Then it gets reinforced on social media. So then I pull back from the television. Okay, fine. Go to my phone, and I'm getting alerts that says this. And then on that, they're conflicting, right? You hear different opinions. And so it's like information overload, can kind of set in. And we all had to have a reasoned approach. We really think my wife and I had a conversation that said, okay, we need to step back. We need to be informed, but let's not jump too deep into it and be engrossed. And so that drives the anxiety. And then, so it's important to get the good information. And that at the beginning, we didn't know where things were coming from. Like, did you get COVID from touch? Was it from respiratory droplets? Did it come from the sun? Who knows where it came from, right?
The sun.
We're trying to figure it out, right? And so I've seen people in the grocery store, I was like, okay, that's a lot going on for that particular outfit that you're wearing. Are people in their car with their mask on? I'm like, by themselves. I'm like, okay, you're kind of socially distant from every other car, so you see a lot of different things until we got it figured out. And I think now we're understanding more of how you contract the disease and what to do. Um, but I think that was a big part of it. I remember, talking about people as they go to the grocery store and the fear that even I had going to the grocery store. Because at the beginning, now my office overlooks a Costco. And so I can take the pulse of America by how long the Costco line is, there. But I remember going into the grocery store and kind of freaking out there because you go in there and you're not sure what to do. Do I hold my breath? Do I breathe? Do I touch something? And then you start to see people buying everything.
Yeah.
And I went in there just to buy a few things. We're like, well, maybe I should buy toilet paper. And
Sorry.
and so those things jump into your mind. And so fear can be good fear. And it's almost this coronaphobia we're seeing now. Someone has termed it, where the whole world has kind of gone a little bit off the deep end because we're not sure what to think about things.
Will that have prolonged effect on your brain, on the way it works? I mean, if that were to continue long term.
Yes. And if you think about it, it gets back down to, we've done a lot of teaching and classes on habits. And, if you want to, we all have a habit of that some are good, some are bad, right? And so I spend a lot of time teaching people how to incorporate exercise into their lifestyle. But we're getting close to the beginning of the year, right? And everyone at the beginning of the year said, I'm going to go out and work out. And it lasted about 2 weeks and they were off, right? Good intentions, but it never became a habit. The brain likes routine. Now, I drive to work every day, right? Now, how did I get here today? I probably couldn't tell you because I'm so used to driving that same route that I no longer think about it. But my first day coming to work, I was like, okay, do I turn left here? Oh my God, there's traffic going on. It was a big deal, right? But over time, after I did it over and over again, my brain took it from somewhere, in the frontal lobe, temporal lobes to more of a automatic behavior. And I no longer have to think about it. So anything that we do over and over again, over time, the brain says, okay, this is important. Let's put this in our automatic behavior category, and it becomes routine, and you don't put as much mental energy into doing it.
Okay.
That's how bad habits start too, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I get to work one day and I, see something scary and I freak out, and then the next day I'm a little bit nervous about it and more nervous about it, and over time I develop this anxiety about going to work that becomes hardwired. And so the fear now is that if we get used to being in this fearful state, the brain physically rewires itself. We're driving in connections that become automatic. And so this anxiety can kick in and become a long-term anxiety. So that's why it's important, I think, for people to speak to someone, speak to a counselor if they are feeling anxious, talk to their doctors, talk to their therapists, their spiritual leaders, to help them get over that. Because if not, you could long-term anxiety problems.
Do you think you're going to see, like in the future, or I should say we're going to see as a society, more like, hoarding issues, or more like this fear leading into, I mean, right?
More hoarding issues.
Right, like to real psychological hoarding. Because like if you think about like people who lived during the Great Depression, like they would hoard money. Like I remember my grandfather, like when he passed away, they found a box with $22,000 in it. Like literally, he kept the cash. Are there going to be like, you're going to go in and find like 4 million rolls of toilet paper in someone's basement? Like, are there people that are going to be so affected by this, even when it's over?
Well, Sonny, back when I was young, we were short on toilet paper.
Find someone that has like 4,000 gallons of Purell they're using their oil tank. You get my point. Like, is it going to create and I know we're sort of teasing about it, but it's create some serious hoarding behavior for people? in the future.
It's possible. It's possible.
Dr. Randy hadn't thought about that, but
But I'm thinking back. I do have a little stash of some things.
Right, because I think we all do. You're sort of like, I only got one bottle of Purell. I'm at the store. Might as well get another one. I think all sort of in the back of our minds, we're sort of going, just in case, right? But there's some people who, because of how they are, have gone extreme with it, or that wouldn't have normally.
Yeah, we've always debated, and we do see that the psychiatric conditions do become heightened during this time. And so, people who have a tendency towards hoarding may well do more hoarding, but yeah, we all have little stockpiles of whatever we have. So, but yeah, and then those behaviors, I think, do over time if they sustain. And so I do think it's important for all of us to just take a deep breath and to start to, and I think it's also a benefit of this time, because we talked about a lot of the bad things that could potentially happen, but at the same time too, many individuals finally had time off because, my wife works, I work, we have two busy kids, and we were always complaining if we only had more time.
Right.
We were running around, it's like basketball, baseball, this and that, this study group at nighttime, get to have them with friends. We were always running, right? And so that became a maladaptive behavior too, right? It was a habit. We just kept on moving, where we finally had time during the pandemic to kind of slow down. We were all home together, like this family dinner was like a real thing.
Right. Everyone was there at 6 o'clock. Or
right.
Yeah.
Well, that leads me to, and you bring up, what positive can come from this. What is your suggestion for people right now? How do we keep our brains healthy during this time? What can we do?
Yeah, we have more power than we think. And we've always talked about that to our patients, that when it comes down to brain health and brain wellness, that you actually have more power than you believe you do. We've seen study after study suggest that exercise is the one thing that can really improve brain function. When I was training as a young neurologist and a medical student, the concept that brains could grow new neurons was heresy. Like it just didn't happen. You in the words of our preschool teachers, you get what you get, don't throw a fit, right? That was it.
Don't get upset.
Exactly. But we've learned now that brains can grow new neurons, and they do often. And a large driving factor for that is our physical activity. That when we exercise, we get more blood flow to the brain that can, in fact, induce angiogenesis, which is developing new blood vessels, which then can get more blood to certain areas, which then can cause more neurons to develop. So it's a big, long process that started with exercise. And so for our patients with dementias, Parkinson's disease, and many of those conditions neurologically that affect the brain and the peripheral system, exercise is a big part of it. So for us now, I think exercise is the big thing for us all to get out and do. Now, you can argue that, well, should I go outside? Is it safe to go into the air? And the beauty is that the brain does not care what you do. You can go for a jog if it's safe for you to do so. But if you're inside the home and you're doing exercise bands, for example, our platform that we developed does allow you to do training via the video. So you can get a personal trainer, through Skype or through the platform that allows you to be able to exercise from the safety of your home. Those things are super important to do because it's going to get your heart rate up, get your blood pressure moving. But also, we know that exercise does help to regulate our mood. That people who exercise can have seen decreasing rates of depression or decreasing intensity of the depressed feelings. So first thing, start to exercise more. That's a big one. Eating. We really haven't discussed that aspect of the pandemic part yet, but it's one thing that the COVID-19 is also what we've seen, and that's the 19 pounds we've all gained from being at home for too much, because we tend to eat foods that are comforting. And you wonder, why are comfort food comfortable? What's your comfort food?
Carbs.
Carbs.
Love my pasta and pizza.
Pasta.
Grilled
Right.
cheese. Grilled cheese.
Grilled cheese. Perfect. I like popcorn, right? And you may ask, why do we like those things? And why is it called comfort food? Well, you can go back to those foods, the carbs, all those parts, the sweetness, if it's a sweet or the
Oh, the ice cream. Gosh, you just
yeah.
reminded me the ice cream.
Now you're gonna want one after we get off
I
this
do.
conversation.
I'm thinking. All right, go ahead.
But the combination of sugar, salt, and a little bit of fat is highly, highly, highly attractive to the brain. And so when we have that, it's like whoosh, it's a rush of nirvana to the brain saying, "Oh, we like that, and I want that more." You know, but when we're growing up, what happens? Our parents typically would reward us with sometimes food.
Yeah.
Or we would do fun things. Like I remember I'm a big Star Wars fan, right? And so I remember seeing Star Wars back in '77, and it was seeing Star Wars, it was the popcorn, and I'm like, instant connection, instant mommy and daddy's there. And that brings back great feelings of warmth and comfort. And so you fast forward years down the line, my popcorn is associated with a feeling of family and comfort. And so now I crave that whenever I feel stressed. And so we tend to go back to those foods that we grew up on or had good experiences with as our comfort foods. And they all tend to be carbs, fatty foods, high salt foods. So in this pandemic, what do? We eat those foods. So getting back to a healthy diet is also extremely important for us to do during this time. And from a brain perspective, it's lots of fruits and vegetables because those are high in antioxidants that allows our brains to really have a good building block. So yeah, so when you binge watch, guys, don't do the the more pastas and things. So.
Right.
Yeah, that's
Don't make the
exactly what
grilled
I
cheese.
do. Actually, the popcorn, the ice cream, and
Yeah, don't make the grilled cheese or the popcorn. Get some broccoli and some carrots, and you're good to go.
Oh, come on, what fun is that?
Well, so we promote something that we call binge watching 2.0. Like if you're gonna binge watch, how do you do it in a way that is good for you? And one thing was to redo your diet and to have you in your house, maybe not the broccoli for you, Nicolette, but we could get some, little carrot, some little carrot fingers and things like that. But get things that are good for you that you can snack on in place of those other food items. So diet, the exercise, and the social connections. We have to make an actual effort to do that. I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, there was like a ton of little apps that you could do to kind of connect. It was Zoom. They had, I think it was a house party or something that you could go on and we found so many creative ways to connect, and that was important for us to do. But as we can do so safely, it's good to do that. Or if you have elderly parents that are around or friends that you haven't talked to for a long time, to just get reach out, that phone call, that connection. Don't just kind of pull in, but make extra effort to be social in that sense, because if we don't, we can completely lose connection, and the brain needs that. The brain needs that for it. So
It
yes.
almost helps us maintain so that when things do return, our brains haven't changed so dramatically, right? I mean, it keep it going so that you can kind of slide back to reality when things are back to normal.
Yeah. And I would even would challenge everyone to just look at it as this is an opportunity for us to also develop new habits that are good for us. And so in regards to first with the family dinner, now granted that was a transition, because we did it, and the kids were like, "What's all this?" And so it wasn't exactly the smoothest, first few weeks, and we had to learn that family dinner is not the time to handle about homework or to handle about their bad habits, right? But it's a time to actually start to praise them for the things that they are doing. So our family has actually changed in how we interact, and I think it was using the opportunity to reevaluate what's going on. And I think that's even almost a higher level of we all share this common bad experience, right? What can we learn from this so that moving forward we come out of it in a better position than we can. So yeah.
Yeah. It must have been hard. Mine getting them to eat at the table was getting them to put their tablets down while they ate. That was
Yes.
hard.
Well, we have a rule, no tablets at dinner in our house. So my son likes to eat at grandma's house because she lets him do whatever he wants.
Exactly. The path of least resistance. They gotta go. We're gonna go over there.
Yes.
Yeah.
But that is special. But you know what? It's actually difficult for us sometimes too, because we have this rule, but then we want to be able to do whatever we want, and we're like, crap, no, put the phone down, I gotta put the phone down. So,
Yeah.
I want to bring something up. Do you think that technology, I was thinking about this when we were talking about like the earlier generation, you're talking about your younger son, and how it was a little bit easier maybe for him. Do you think that it's see, we've already lived life without all of this technology. So do you think that it works best then if we already know how to function in society and then implement the technology instead of just only knowing the technology?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does, and that's a deep question that we are currently wrestling with, in the sense of how do we properly navigate this new tech world. Now, as an engineer and a physician, I love both, right? But I do wonder that the introduction of technology at a younger age, what does that mean for the children down the line?
Right.
So in our school, I mean, they get their laptops, they're using it truly for work, right? But then if you look at not even an infant, but like a 2, 3, 4 year old, that screen is extremely intriguing to them. And you see it early on that it's hard to pull those tablets away from them. And then as a parent, it's sometimes is a great babysitter, so it's more of a testament to how we would parent. And we have to check ourselves for that, is that,
Right.
we need to be physically engaging with our children versus letting them sit down with a tablet and do it. So there are pluses and minuses. I do always try to say we have to balance our tech with our rec, our technology with our recreation. How do we keep those two things balanced? And it does lead to a lot of society look and interact differently 10, 15, 20 years from now. And we actually probably started a research study that looks into how does learning go on, and even before the pandemic, right? The pandemic just heightened that conversation.
Right.
But how does learning go? I'm also currently I'm a professor with one of our engineering and medicine programs, where you got medical students who are getting an MD degree, but also a degree in engineering, a master's. And from the very onset, they're looking at how do we combine these two fields with the intention of developing better technology for our bodies. And so and they're all online, a lot of their classes,
Right.
and they do fine with that. But you argue that when they're younger and it's all online or it's all virtual without that interaction, do they lose the social skills? Right, that we had. I try to tweet, but I won't have a lot to say. So I'm limiting to those characters is hard for it. So I think those are all will be learned as we go forward, is how we interact, and does our social skills change because of technology.
Well, Dr. Randy, we could sit here and keep talking all day. You're incredibly fascinating, but in the interest of time, can you please let us know where we can learn more about you and your work? What are you working on? Tell us where we can find you.
Yeah, so I'm definitely engaged on LinkedIn. So please feel free to reach out on that. In regards to our platforms that we are working on, ModiHealth, modihc.com is where we have a great website that does all the online training and interactions people can engage with. And I think it's a great balance between technology of how it can help us through a pandemic, for example, to keep physically active, but yet still be socially distant. And I love these kind of conversations. So just let's continue to have a talk about technology, because it just keeps on expanding and expanding and expanding where we can go. So
Thank you so much for joining us. We really, really appreciate it.
it is my pleasure. Thank you for having me.